So my big idea for Sydney that I wanted to present to you today is 30k speed limits for local streets. That would be better for our communities and would in particular be very helpful for children and elderly people to get around. And I also want to talk about how that will hardly cost us anything and create a lot of benefits for everyone. So I always like to kick off by talking about travel times. So when we talk about travel times, so to walk, this 20 seconds is interesting. So yes, so when we walk, a 1k distance, let's focus on that. To walk, it takes 12 minutes, and cycling is around 3 times faster. So in a lot of cities, bicycle couriers is actually a way to deliver really urgent deliveries because it's a really efficient transport method in urban environment. And what also might surprise you is actually that the difference in travel time between a speed limit of 30 and 50k is actually not very significant. And thinking about that most people live within 1k of an arterial road where this wouldn't apply, the impact on travel time is probably less than a minute for most trips if we did this. And the other thing that happens, this is another way to look at this data, is so in order to halve our travel time, we have to go at least double as fast, but also in an urban context, the travel time often gets determined wait time at intersections, congestion, other cars, all these things. So the additional benefit of a speed limit above 30 is not very high. And on the other side of the equation, unfortunately, the risk for people walking when hit by cars goes up significantly, but above speed limits or impact speeds of 30k per hour. So when you get hit at 40k, it's at least double as deadly as when being hit at 30k. And that's probably why around the world, most, a lot of countries have settled for 30k speed limits in local streets. So the sweet spot by getting us to our destination in a reasonable time frame, but also by keeping people safe who walk and cycle, especially children, and also prevent a lot of crashes from happening in the first place. So, I was actually stunned by Australian holiday parks because I kind of imagine everywhere to be like that. An environment where drivers watch out for other road users, where they, let people cross the street, where they watch out. And you do achieve that in a low-speed environment, that driver behavior that we need for our children and our elderly people to get around in our local streets. Australian kids actually do miss out on active travel a lot. So the amount of children in Australia that are allowed to walk or ride to school is very low compared to other international peer countries where it's really normal to walk to school from a young age independently. And on those countries where that happens, it usually the speed limit is 30k in those local streets or less. And it matters. Australian children are actually ranking pretty low compared to other peer countries on outcomes like physical and mental health. So and we do know that walking and cycling and physical exercise obviously is, making children happier. And especially there is a correlation between independent mobility for children and well-being outcomes. So that children can actually just leave the house, leave their parents behind, visit their friends, walk to school. That does create happier children. We do need safer streets for our kids to be able to do that. And one big factor for us parents to be able to let our kids walk to school is obviously how easy it is to cross streets, also for elderly people. And one really big important factor is how fast are the cars driving. And also that determines usually how nice the drivers are. Are they going to stop to let people cross the street? And you can do that more easily at a lower speed. And why is this a big idea? Because actually, you might have heard the 80-20 rule before. I came across it in my time at an investment banker. My boss told me I'm going to make 80% of my profits with 20% of my clients. And this actually, when I read that in Munich, 80% of streets have 30k speed limits, that came back to my mind. Because if you drive around in Munich, you wouldn't guess that so many streets have 30k speed limits. Because in our network, it's actually a lot of streets. But they are not very important for people driving because they usually stay on the arterial roads where you usually use separation. So, having grown up myself 40 years ago in Germany on a 30k street where that has been rolled out 40 years ago, that is the norm in German neighborhoods, but more and more around the world, it's becoming the norm to have those 30k speed limits in local streets. So if you have a look at that. Speed, of cars, fast speeds, has a cost to walking infrastructure. So when you look at that bridge, that is the cost of letting cars go fast. So you need then this fancy bridge, then you say, oh, I spent so much money on walking. It's not even actually very good because you have stairs for people walking. So if we did reduce speed limits, we can create walking infrastructure at much lower cost. For example, footpaths, you don't have to raise the curb in a 30k street. In a 50k street, it's pretty expensive to build footpaths. So, you know, if you think about Greater Sydney, a lot of suburban streets don't have footpaths on both sides of the street. This is something we could do. And the kind of approach to change an urban default speed limit has been done in Australia before. So the speed limit was changed from 60 to 50k per hour a few decades ago, and it did work. So we saw a significant reduction in crashes in the urban area. And so now you will probably hear some road safety experts in Australia say, yes, good idea, 30k, global best practice. Let's do it in our high pedestrian areas, but nowhere else, just where there's lots of people walking. And that is, I think, a pretty sad approach because we want people to be able to walk from their house to their destination. And so you have to actually apply it area-wide because that also creates better value for money. If you do big interventions in small areas, that costs a lot more money and doesn't give you as much results as you get if you do this like in an area-wide context. And then you can do these kind of things, cheap things to help with it. And, you know, also when I grew up, I remember public smoking was very normal. So I went out to restaurants, nightclubs, always public smoking. And we changed that. So that is possible to change behavior. But in that context, it's better to create a general rule than like a exception street by street. Thank you very much.